The smell of charcoal and barbecue sauce filled the air in my parents' backyard on that humid Saturday afternoon in July. 28 family members had gathered for our annual summer cookout, and I was standing at the grill in my usual position, quietly flipping burgers and hot dogs while everyone else socialized around the pool and patio furniture. At 31, I'd become the designated grill master for these events, partly because I was good at it, but mostly because it kept me occupied and away from the center of family drama. My brother Marcus, 34 and eternally optimistic about his next big business venture, was holding court near the pool with his usual audience of admiring cousins and uncles. He stood there in his expensive polo shirt and designer sunglasses, gesturing dramatically with a beer in his hand as he explained his latest entrepreneurial breakthrough to anyone within earshot. "The timing couldn't be more perfect," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying across the yard with the confident tone he'd perfected during his brief stint selling luxury cars before that venture collapsed. "Food truck businesses are absolutely exploding right now. Everyone wants artisanal street food, and the overhead is minimal compared to traditional restaurants. I'm talking about pure profit margins." Uncle Steve, who owned a moderately successful plumbing business, nodded approvingly from his lawn chair. "Smart thinking, Marcus. Mobile businesses have real advantages in this economy. Lower rent, flexible locations, direct customer interaction." My cousin Jake, fresh out of college with a business degree and no real-world experience, leaned forward with obvious excitement. "That's brilliant, man. Food trucks can make serious money at festivals and downtown lunch spots. What kind of concept are you thinking?" Marcus took a long swig of his beer and smiled like someone who'd figured out a secret that nobody else understood. "Gourmet grilled cheese and Kraft soup combinations. Comfort food with a premium twist. Think truffle mac and cheese grilled sandwiches paired with roasted tomato bisque. The profit margins on cheese and bread are incredible, and people will pay $15 for the right presentation." The group murmured appreciation for his business acumen and creative vision. My Aunt Carol, who managed a successful boutique clothing store, actually clapped her hands together with enthusiasm. "Oh Marcus, that sounds absolutely delicious and marketable. Have you secured financing yet?" That's when Marcus's smile shifted into something more mischievous and self-satisfied. He glanced over toward me at the grill, and I could see the familiar expression that meant he was about to reveal something he considered particularly clever. "Actually, I've already handled the financing," he announced with obvious pride. "Got approved for a $75,000 small business loan just this week. The bank was incredibly impressed with my credit profile and financial stability." I continued turning the burgers methodically, keeping my expression neutral and my movements calm. Something in Marcus's tone suggested there was more to this story, and experience had taught me that patience usually revealed the full picture without any prompting from me. Cousin Jennifer, who worked as a loan officer at a regional bank, looked genuinely impressed. $75,000 for a startup food truck business? That's substantial funding. Your credit score must be exceptional to qualify for that kind of unsecured business loan. Marcus practically preened under the attention and admiration. "Well, let's just say I've been very strategic about building the right financial profile for this opportunity." The way he said strategic sent a small warning signal through my mind, but I continued grilling and listening without any visible reaction. In my work as a senior financial crimes analyst at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, I'd learned to recognize the subtle verbal patterns that often preceded admissions of financial fraud or identity manipulation. "Strategic how?" asked my cousin David, who worked in mortgage lending and understood the complexities of business loan approvals. "Banks are pretty strict about small business lending these days. They want to see established income, business experience, and solid credit history." Marcus's grin widened, and he looked around the group like he was about to share the punchline of a particularly good joke. "Let's just say I borrowed some information from someone with better financial credentials than my own current situation might reflect." The group laughed appreciatively, assuming he meant he'd gotten advice from a financial consultant or used someone else's business plan as a template. They had no way of knowing that borrowed information in the context of loan applications typically meant identity theft and federal crimes. "Come on, Marcus," Jake pressed with obvious curiosity. "Give us the details. How did you pull off such a great loan approval?" Marcus took another drink and gestured toward me with his beer bottle. "Well, since you're all asking, I borrowed my dear brother's identity information for the loan application. Used his social security number, employment history and credit profile. Turns out Kevin's got fantastic credit and a much better debt-to-income ratio than I realized. The admission hung in the air for a moment before the family erupted in laughter and approval. Uncle Steve slapped his knee with amusement. That's brilliant. Keep it in the family. Aunt Carol nodded with obvious admiration for Marcus's resourcefulness. Smart thinking. Why let good credit go to waste when family can benefit from it? Cousin Jennifer, despite her professional banking experience, smiled approvingly. As long as Kevin doesn't mind, that's actually pretty clever. Family helping family with financial opportunities. My father, grilling corn on the cob next to my station, chuckled and shook his head with fond exasperation. That's our Marcus, always finding creative solutions to business challenges. I continued flipping burgers and arranging them on the serving platter, maintaining the same peaceful expression I'd worn throughout the conversation. The family interpreted my calm silence as either tacit approval or simple disinterest in Marcus's business ventures, which were admittedly frequent and often short-lived. What they didn't know was that identity theft involving federal employees with security clearances triggers automatic investigation protocols within hours of detection. My position at FinCEN required comprehensive monitoring of my personal financial activities, and any unauthorized use of my identity information would be flagged immediately by federal security systems designed to detect potential compromises of sensitive personnel. Marcus had just admitted to committing aggravated identity theft, wire fraud and bank fraud in front of 28 witnesses, using the personal information of someone whose identity was protected under federal security monitoring protocols. The loan application would have been processed through banking systems that automatically cross-reference applicant information with federal databases, including security clearance holders and sensitive government employees. The best part, Marcus continued, warming to his audience's enthusiasm, is that Kevin's employment with the Treasury Department made the whole application process incredibly smooth. Banks love lending to government employees because of the job security and steady income. I barely had to provide any additional documentation. More laughter and approval from the family. My mother, who was arranging potato salad on the buffet table, looked over at both of us with obvious maternal pride. It's so wonderful when brothers help each other succeed. Kevin's always been so stable and responsible, and Marcus has such entrepreneurial vision. This is exactly how families should work together. The irony was almost overwhelming. My stable government job wasn't just employment with the Treasury Department, it was a senior analyst position with FinCEN investigating exactly the types of financial crimes that Marcus had just committed. My security clearance required continuous monitoring of my financial activities specifically to prevent the kind of identity compromise he was describing so proudly. "When do you take delivery of the food truck?" asked Uncle Steve, clearly invested in Marcus's success story. "Next week," Marcus replied with obvious satisfaction. Already got permits approved for 3 downtown locations and a catering contract with the university for their summer event series. This business is going to be generating serious cash flow within 60 days. Cousin David raised his beer bottle in a toast. Here's to Marcus and his gourmet grilled cheese empire. And to Kevin for being a good brother and sharing the wealth. Everyone joined the toast, including several family members who had walked over from other conversations to hear about Marcus's exciting new venture. I was surrounded by relatives celebrating what they saw as clever family cooperation and entrepreneurial success, completely unaware they were applauding multiple federal crimes. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus continued receiving congratulations and business advice from various family members. He explained his marketing strategy, described his planned menu offerings, and shared his projections for expansion into catering and event services. The food truck loan had apparently given him access to additional credit lines for equipment and inventory, all approved based on my identity and employment information. By evening, as we were cleaning up the barbecue and packing leftover food, Marcus pulled me aside near the garage where we'd stored extra chairs and coolers. He was slightly drunk from celebrating, and his earlier bravado had shifted into something more genuinely grateful and brotherly. "Kevin, I know I should have asked before using your information for the loan application," he said, attempting a serious tone despite his obvious intoxication. "But I knew you'd probably overthink it and worry about all kinds of complications that would never actually happen." I continued stacking plastic chairs and nodded thoughtfully. I'm sure you put a lot of thought into the decision, Marcus. He seemed relieved by my calm response and lack of anger or accusation. Exactly. This is really a win-win situation for both of us. The business is going to be incredibly successful and I'll pay off the loan ahead of schedule. Your credit score will actually improve from the positive payment history. Plus, family should help family when opportunities arise. I loaded the last of the chairs into the garage and turned to face him directly. I hope everything works out exactly as planned, Marcus. Monday morning arrived with typical Washington, D.C. humidity and the familiar routine of commuting to the Treasury building for another week of analyzing financial crime patterns. I was at my desk by 7:45 a.m., reviewing suspicious activity reports from banks across the Southeast region that showed potential structuring patterns designed to evade federal reporting requirements. My secure workstation provided access to multiple federal databases used to track financial crimes, money laundering operations, and identity theft schemes. As a senior analyst with top-secret clearance, I regularly coordinated with FBI financial crimes units, DA money laundering investigations, and Homeland Security counterterrorism financing operations. At 10:17 a.m., my supervisor Jennifer Walsh knocked on my office door with an expression that immediately told me something significant had happened. Jennifer was a 20-year veteran of financial crimes investigation who had worked her way up from field agent to unit chief, and she rarely showed concern unless the situation was serious. "Kevin, I need to speak with you about a flagged transaction involving your personal identity information," she said, closing the door behind her and taking a seat across from my desk. "Our automated monitoring systems detected unauthorized use of your Social Security number on a bank loan application filed last Thursday." I leaned back in my chair and looked at Jennifer's concerned expression. "That sounds very serious. What kind of loan application?" $75,000 small business loan approved by First National Bank using your employment information, credit history, and identity credentials. The application was submitted by someone named Marcus Johnson, who listed himself as your business partner. Jennifer opened a file folder and spread several documents across my desk. "The system flagged it immediately because your security clearance requires monitoring of all financial activities involving your personal information." I examined the loan documents, which showed Marcus's signature next to my forged signature on multiple pages. He had used my Social Security number, employment history, and financial information while listing himself as co-applicant for the business loan. The bank had approved the loan based primarily on my government employment and credit profile. Jennifer, Marcus Johnson is my older brother. I did not authorize him to use my personal information for any loan applications or business partnerships. Her expression shifted from concern to professional focus. "So this is identity theft involving a federal employee with security clearance. That triggers mandatory FBI involvement and federal prosecution protocols." She gathered the documents back into her file. "Kevin, I need to ask directly. Did you have any knowledge or involvement in this loan application?" "No knowledge or involvement whatsoever. I learned about the loan at a family barbecue on Saturday when Marcus announced it to approximately 30 relatives." Jennifer's eyes widened slightly. "He announced federal identity theft crimes at a family gathering? With witnesses?" 28 witnesses heard him admit to using my identity information for the loan. Several family members congratulated him on his cleverness and resourcefulness. She shook her head with the expression of someone who had investigated financial crimes for 2 decades and still encountered new levels of criminal stupidity. "Kevin, I need to initiate federal investigation protocols immediately. This involves identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, and potential security clearance violations. FBI agents will want to interview you this afternoon." At 2:30 p.m., Special Agent Carlos Rivera from the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force arrived at the Treasury building to conduct a formal interview about the identity theft. Agent Rivera was a soft-spoken man in his 40s who had spent 15 years investigating white-collar crimes and identity theft schemes targeting federal employees. "Mr. Johnson, I understand your brother used your personal information to obtain a business loan without your knowledge or authorization," Agent Rivera said as we sat in a secure conference room. "Can you walk me through how you discovered this information?" I provided a detailed account of Saturday's barbecue, including Marcus's public admission and the family's supportive reaction to his criminal behavior. Agent Rivera took careful notes and asked follow-up questions about specific family members who had witnessed or encouraged the identity theft. This is somewhat unusual, Agent Rivera observed after reviewing my statement. Most identity theft victims discover the crime through credit monitoring or financial irregularities. Your brother essentially confessed in front of multiple witnesses at a social gathering. Marcus seemed proud of his resourcefulness and assumed I would approve of his use of my information to help his business venture, I explained. The family viewed it as clever problem-solving rather than criminal behavior. Agent Rivera nodded with the expression of someone who had seen similar cases. Federal employees with security clearances are frequent targets for identity theft because of their stable employment and good credit profiles. However, they're also protected by enhanced federal monitoring systems that detect unauthorized activity quickly. He closed his notebook and looked at me directly. Mr. Johnson, we'll be executing search warrants at your brother's residence and business locations within the next 2 hours. Given that he admitted to federal crimes in front of multiple witnesses, this investigation will proceed rapidly. At 4:23 p.m., my personal cell phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. Kevin, what the hell is happening? His voice was panicked and shrill. FBI agents just surrounded my house with cars and official badges. They're saying I committed federal crimes and demanding access to my computers and financial records. I was still in my office at Treasury, finishing my daily case reports and preparing for tomorrow's briefings on cryptocurrency money laundering patterns. Through my window, I could see the federal building's flag moving in the humid afternoon breeze. That sounds very stressful, Marcus. What exactly are the agents telling you? They have warrants for search and seizure. They're talking about identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, and violations of federal security protocols. His voice cracked with fear and confusion. They want to know about unauthorized use of federal employee information and potential security clearance violations. 2 FBI agents and 1 Treasury Department criminal investigator had indeed arrived at Marcus's house at 4:15 p.m. They carried federal warrants authorizing seizure of computers, financial documents, business records, and any materials related to the fraudulent loan application. Additional agents were simultaneously executing search warrants at the food truck location and First National Bank. Marcus, I said calmly, you admitted at the family barbecue that you used my identity information to obtain a business loan without my authorization. That constitutes federal identity theft, wire fraud, and bank fraud. But you're my brother. I thought family helping family was different. Federal law doesn't recognize family relationships as exemptions from identity theft and fraud statutes. You committed serious federal crimes using the personal information of someone with government security clearance, which triggers enhanced penalties and mandatory prosecution. The line was quiet except for his rapid breathing and what sounded like agents speaking in the background, explaining search procedures and legal rights. Kevin, you have to stop this. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding between brothers. I cannot stop a federal investigation, Marcus. You committed the crimes, you admitted to the crimes in front of 28 witnesses, and federal law enforcement agencies are required to prosecute those crimes regardless of family relationships. Agent Rivera's voice could be heard in the background, reading Miranda rights and explaining federal arrest procedures. Marcus was being given the opportunity to cooperate with the investigation and answer questions about his criminal activity. They're asking about the loan application, the forged signatures, and whether anyone else was involved in the identity theft scheme, Marcus said, his voice becoming more panicked. What am I supposed to tell them? You should tell them the truth about what you did and retain qualified federal criminal defense counsel immediately, I replied in the same calm tone I used when briefing law enforcement agencies about financial crime investigations. Lying to federal agents about crimes you've already admitted to committing will result in additional charges for obstruction of justice and false statements. At 5:47 p.m., Marcus was formally arrested and charged with aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, and violations of federal security monitoring protocols. He was processed at the FBI field office and held in federal detention pending arraignment. The charges were comprehensive and serious. Aggravated identity theft involving federal employees carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 2 years, while wire fraud and bank fraud involving amounts over $70,000 carry potential sentences of up to 20 years in federal prison. The security clearance violations added additional penalties because Marcus had potentially compromised federal monitoring systems designed to protect sensitive government personnel. First National Bank faced regulatory scrutiny for their role in approving fraudulent loan applications without adequate verification of applicant identity and authorization. The bank's loan officers were required to provide testimony about their approval process and documentation review procedures. The food truck Marcus had purchased with the fraudulent loan was immediately seized as proceeds of criminal activity. The university catering contract was terminated when the contractor was arrested on federal charges, and the downtown permits were revoked due to criminal investigation of the business owner. My family's reaction was predictably supportive of Marcus and critical of my betrayal of family loyalty. Multiple relatives called to express disappointment that I had pressed charges against my own brother over what they still characterized as a family misunderstanding that should have been resolved privately. My mother was particularly upset, calling me repeatedly to demand that I fix this situation by withdrawing my complaint or speaking to my supervisors about dismissing the charges. She couldn't understand that federal identity theft crimes don't disappear because family members ask nicely, and that my position involved investigating financial crimes rather than dismissing them. At Marcus's federal arraignment 3 weeks later, he appeared in federal court wearing a detention jumpsuit, looking pale and exhausted from his time in federal holding. His court-appointed federal defender advised him to plead guilty and cooperate fully with the investigation to minimize his sentence under federal guidelines. Federal prosecutors presented evidence including Marcus's recorded admissions at the family barbecue, testimony from 28 witnesses who heard him confess to identity theft, financial records showing the detailed fraudulent loan application, and expert testimony from Treasury Department officials explaining federal monitoring systems and security protocols. The federal judge denied bail, citing the seriousness of identity theft charges involving federal employee information and the potential for additional criminal activity if Marcus was released. He would remain in federal detention until sentencing, which was scheduled for 6 weeks later. During the pre-sentencing investigation, federal probation officers discovered that Marcus had previously used other family members' credit card information for personal purchases, suggesting a pattern of identity theft within the family. He had also submitted fraudulent employment verification documents for previous loan applications, indicating systematic financial fraud rather than isolated poor judgment. The additional evidence eliminated any possibility of reduced charges or lenient sentencing. Federal guidelines for aggravated identity theft involving security clearance violations require enhanced penalties to protect federal monitoring systems and sensitive government operations. 6 weeks later, Marcus was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison followed by 3 years supervised probation. The judge ordered restitution of $95,000 to cover the fraudulent loan amount, federal investigation costs, bank regulatory penalties, and administrative expenses for security protocol reviews. Federal prosecutors explained during sentencing that crimes involving federal employee identity information carry enhanced penalties because they potentially compromise national security systems designed to protect sensitive government personnel and operations. Marcus's actions had triggered expensive security reviews and enhanced monitoring procedures that cost taxpayers significant resources. The federal judge noted that Marcus's public admission of his crimes at a family gathering, witnessed by nearly 30 people, demonstrated a complete lack of understanding about the seriousness of federal financial crimes and identity theft violations. My employment at FinCEN was unaffected by Marcus's crimes, though my security clearance was reviewed and my personal financial monitoring was enhanced as a precautionary measure. Federal security officials conducted comprehensive background reinvestigations to ensure that Marcus's criminal activity hadn't compromised any sensitive information or operations. The family barbecue tradition was quietly discontinued after several relatives received federal subpoenas as material witnesses in criminal proceedings. Uncle Steve, Aunt Carol, and 6 cousins were required to provide sworn testimony about Marcus's admissions and the family's reaction to his criminal behavior. Several family members faced their own scrutiny when background investigators discovered that other relatives had also used each other's credit card information or personal details for various transactions. What had seemed like casual family cooperation was revealed to be a pattern of identity theft and financial fraud spanning several years. I still work at FinCEN analyzing financial crime patterns and coordinating with federal law enforcement agencies. I still drive my modest Honda Civic and live in my monitored downtown condo. I still maintain the quiet lifestyle required for someone with access to sensitive financial intelligence. The difference is that family gatherings are now much smaller and more subdued. Marcus won't be eligible for release until he serves his full federal sentence, and several relatives avoid me because they associate me with causing his imprisonment rather than investigating the crimes he chose to commit. My parents occasionally ask when I'll forgive Marcus and help with his commissary expenses in federal prison. I explain that federal identity theft convictions carry serious long-term consequences, including permanent restrictions on his ability to obtain credit, employment in financial services, or business licenses. They still don't understand that my security clearance prohibits me from providing financial assistance to family members convicted of federal crimes, particularly those involving identity theft and financial fraud. Any such assistance would jeopardize my career and potentially result in my own criminal charges. Last month I received a letter from Marcus at the Federal Correctional Institution where he's serving his sentence. He wrote that he finally understands the seriousness of identity theft and federal financial crimes, but he's struggling to comprehend why borrowing his brother's information resulted in federal prison rather than family cooperation. He asked why I never warned him about the potential legal consequences of using someone else's identity information for loan applications, especially when that someone works for federal financial crimes investigation. I haven't responded to the letter. Federal employees are discouraged from maintaining correspondence with family members convicted of financial crimes, and my security clearance requires disclosure of all contact with individuals who have committed crimes involving federal systems or personnel. The annual family barbecue was replaced with smaller gatherings that I generally don't attend. When I do interact with family members, they're much more careful about discussing their financial activities, business ventures, and any suggestions involving shared resources or information. Some lessons about federal law and personal responsibility can only be learned through direct experience with the federal justice system. Marcus is receiving excellent education in the long-term consequences of identity theft, wire fraud, and violations of federal security protocols. The food truck business never opened. The fraudulent loan was added to federal databases as evidence of systematic financial crimes. My identity information remains under enhanced federal monitoring, exactly where it belongs for someone with access to sensitive financial intelligence systems.